My name is Mark Argash, and I'm from Westport, Connecticut, and I've been a long-term investor in FDD. I have the honor today of presenting Representatives Ileana Ros-Lehtinen and Ted Deutch with an award named for an extraordinary thinker and statesman. Jeane Kirkpatrick spent her life studying and fighting totalitarianism. Her story is quintessentially American. Born in rural Oklahoma, raised by a $1-a-day roughneck during the Great Depression, she became an action intellectual, a maker of global policy and history, a friend, inspiration, and founding board member of FDD. She is best known for her service as U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations. She was the first woman to serve in the post. She was a Democrat handpicked by Ronald Reagan after she came to his attention for penning the now famous essay, Dictatorships and Double Standards. That essay was a bold call for unapologetic American leadership in the world. It expressed a conviction that liberal idealism is not incompatible with the unrelenting defense of freedom and U.S. national interests. At the UN, Kirkpatrick was a strong voice of reason and conscience, outspoken about Soviet adventurism and repression. The Russian dissident Andrei Sakharov once said, "Her name was known in every cell of the Gulag because of her candor about Soviet human rights violations." In recognition of her distinguished service, she received the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the nation's highest honor. We created at FDD the annual Kirkpatrick Award to honor her legacy and her clear-eyed understanding of the complicated challenges our nation faces. One day after the terrorist attacks of 9/11, Kirkpatrick called on Congress to issue a formal declaration of war against the entire fundamentalist Islamist terrorist network. She would be appalled to know that threat has spread to more corners of the globe since her death 9 years ago. But I also think she'd be heartened to know that there are resolute leaders like the two of you who share her conviction and steadfast leadership in the fight against global terrorism and tyranny. Representative Ros-Lehtinen, chair of the House Foreign Affairs Subcommittee on the Middle East and North Africa, and Representative Ted Deutch, ranking Democrat on the subcommittee, have worked hand in hand to thwart Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons. Both are passionate advocates for human rights, and both have shown real grit and a laser-like focus in countering the rising tide of global terrorism. Representative Ros-Lehtinen experienced tyranny firsthand as a child before her family fled Cuba. She earned a doctorate in education, and after serving as a school teacher for many years, became the first Hispanic woman to serve in Congress. Representative Ros-Lehtinen is a stalwart supporter of Israel. She authored the Israel Strategic Partnership Act of 2013 and the Palestinian Anti-Terrorism Act of 2006. This bill bans direct aid and contact with a Hamas-controlled Palestinian Authority until Hamas agrees to renounce violence, recognize Israel's right to exist, and abide by previous agreements. A passionate defender of human rights, she authored the 2006 Iran Freedom Support Act and the 2012 Iran Threat Reduction and Syrian Human Rights Act. Setting a personal example, she adopted an Iranian prisoner of conscience, Rosita Basiji, as part of the Tom Lantos Defending Freedoms Project. The Congresswoman's track record on Iran goes back well over a decade, when as chair of the International Economic Policy and Trade Subcommittee, she headed oversight of the implementation of the original Iran and Libya Sanctions Act. Since then, she has been a leader, author, or original co-sponsor of all the major Iran sanctions bills in the House. Like Kirkpatrick, Representative Ros-Lehtinen has been resolute and clear about stating the U.S. interests. Quote, "The objective is to prevent Iran from ever acquiring a nuclear weapon and to dismantle and destroy its nuclear infrastructure not simply pushing back its breakout time, quote. She went on to say, it's not in the national security interest of the United States to provide Iran additional access to cash with which it can proliferate and expand other illicit activities, specifically its support for global terror. Congresswoman, we thank you for your leadership. Congressman Deutch has been a long leader in efforts to stand up to Iran and its supporters. As a state senator in Florida, he stood up to Vitol, a company that supplied 60% of Iran's refined petroleum imports when it tried to build a facility in his district. He also helped pass the nation's first Iran divestment legislation. As a result, Florida divested $1 billion from Iran's energy sector. In Congress, Representative Deutch has been a strong voice on the necessity of a verifiable agreement with Iran before any sanctions can be lifted. Quote, this regime has unfortunately proven itself untrustworthy time and time again. We simply do not want to see an agreement that allows Iran to acquire a nuclear weapon right under our noses, he said. Representative Deutch also has been focused on Iran's dismal human rights record. He has documented the country's continued oppression of women, gays and lesbians, and members of the Baha'i faith. He authored the 2011 Iran Human Rights and Democracy Promotion Act, which has become an important part of the 2012 sanctions bill that President Obama signed into law. He knows that human rights in Iran have fared no better since President Rouhani's election. Iran has been, quote, Iran has been engaging in the most egregious abuses of its people for too long, and the international community must continue to stand up for those who cannot stand up for themselves, he said. On a personal note, Congressman, my wife and I met you several years ago when you were still a state representative, having lunch at an APAC policy conference, and we said, watch out for this guy's, leadership in Congress someday. So it's great to, be with you here today too. Ted, Ileana, today we express our deep gratitude to both of you for your work across the political aisle to ensure that the Iranian threat is countered in all its dimensions. You've understood, perhaps better than most, that there's no technical algorithm that can save what is fundamentally a strategic problem, the nature, aims, and behavior of this Iranian regime. Please join me in recognizing the recipients of the 2015 Jeane J. Kirkpatrick Statesmanship Award, Representatives Ileana Ros-Lehtinen and Ted Deutch.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jonathan Schanzer. I'm the Vice President for Research at FDD. I want to welcome you to this afternoon session with our Jeane J. Kirkpatrick Statesmanship Award winners. I'm particularly pleased to be sitting alongside both of you who testified at your subcommittee. We've worked with your offices, and we are continually impressed with your dedication to the security of the United States of America and its allies, the seriousness with which you approach this work. And we want to dive right in to ask some poignant questions in light of things that are happening in foreign policy today. Congressman Deutch, I'd like to start with you this afternoon to ask you if you would just please describe to us the compromise that was recently struck on Capitol Hill with regard to the Iran nuclear deal, whether this is a good compromise, why it's a good compromise, and what we might expect moving forward.
Sure, thanks. And first, if I may, I want to thank you for the very much for the award. I can safely say that in 1988, when I sat in the stands at Michigan Stadium listening to Jeane Kirkpatrick deliver the commencement address at my college graduation, that I never could have imagined receiving this high an honor. So thanks so much to FDD for this. I also want to just acknowledge your President Cliff May, who's here, Cliff, and I think is the chairman here? Where's Jim? Was here. So your chairman, Jim Woolsey, and certainly your executive director, Mark, for the incredible work that all of you do. Mark Dubitz and I, and I know it's true for Ileana as well, work closely together as we do with Jonathan, as we do with so many others. The kind of information that we get from FDD in a timely and thoughtful and well-crafted way helps us do our jobs better. It's a commitment that we both make to move forward on all of these issues, and to have an ally and partner in that work like FDD makes it easier for us to do our job. So thanks for the award, but more importantly, thanks for all of the incredible work that FDD does, and to your leadership as well. To yesterday's news, I actually think that it was this was a significant development. Look, think about where we were at our, I think, most recent hearing that we held on the Iran deal. I expressed at the time that, at that hearing, that the way that the framework was coming together as we understood it, this was before the framework had been announced, it looked as if there was going to be a vote at the United Nations Security Council. We now see what that will look like. We can talk about that more if you'd like. But there was going to be a vote at the UN Security Council on sanctions relief in the deal, which meant that, as I said at the time, that representatives of Malaysia, of Venezuela, of Nigeria were going to have a vote on the deal. The members of the UN Security Council were going to have a vote on this deal. Certainly, members of the United States Congress should have a vote on this deal as well. And there was a question as to whether that was actually going to happen. And yesterday, because of, I think in large part, the tremendous leadership of Chairman Corker in working with the ranking member, Ben Cardin, and also Senator Menendez, they were able to work something out that recognized that Congress absolutely has and should have a voice in this process. That's what we saw yesterday. I think it's a significant development. It allows us now, knowing that there will be the opportunity to vote first on that bill, probably as early as next week, certainly in the Senate next week, and perhaps as early as next week in the House, that we will have a vote. It also allows us, knowing that, to zero in on the details of the framework and where this is going, and I know you'll have more questions about that, but that's really what the focus needs to be on now going forward.
Very good. So, Madam Chairman, could you tell us what it is that you are looking for in this agreement? When this comes to you and you get a chance to weigh in, what do you want to see?
Well, first of all, thank you, Jonathan, and Ted and I are both quite humbled to receive this award. The name that this award has on its beautiful plaque is a name of a valiant freedom fighter and human rights advocate, and Ted has that personal connection to Jeane Kirkpatrick, being his commencement speaker, but I also have one as well, because Jeane Kirkpatrick wrote the foreword for one of my dad. He's since passed away, but he was a Cuban historian, and he talked about Cuba and their malicious campaign throughout the world exporting revolution. I think that the administration wants to skip over that history, but that's for another topic. And Jeane Kirkpatrick wrote the foreword to my dad's book, and it wasn't because of me, it was because of my dad's great work. So to get an award with her name means the world to me. Now, first let me just, I love Ted, he's my co-chair, I always tell him that. He says, well, then let me set the agenda. He's not the ranking member. But I disagree a little bit with what Ted is saying about how this is such a significant movement yesterday with Congress having a say. Of course we should have a say, but I think that it's not a losing proposition for the president, because were we to disapprove of the deal, and he'll have enough time to lobby Congress about that, were we to disapprove, he would veto that bill, and to get 67 votes to override that veto is impossible really to do in the U.S. Senate. So it really is a risk that he can afford to take, because he's not going to lose that bet. So I don't think that we should herald it as a big improvement. It was ludicrous to begin with that Congress would not have a say. Of course the president wants to go back to the UN, because remember, the UN passed really tough sanctions. The UN bar on the sanctions was up to here. The president, in this framework, he's lowered the bar, so he needs to go back to the UN so he can wipe away those resolutions and say, okay, this is the new bar that we're going to measure it against, from here to here. And it's even lowered the bar, this framework has lowered the bar from the president's own words just a year and a half ago. What he said about the Iranian nuclear program, where his stance was, and now it's watered down so much that I fully expect Iran to comply with this framework. And when we get a deal, I think that Iran will comply. We've lowered the bar so much so that it would be foolish for Iran not to comply. They can continue with research and development. They have, it doesn't even talk about the Parshin facility, Fordo. Well, that's just going to be research and development. Rouhani and the Supreme Leader, they've said, lift all sanctions before we sign any deal. And they haven't seemed to backtrack from that. What I'd like to see is the details of it before we get an opportunity to really sign off on that deal. And this is, you know, look what's just happened recently. Russia decided, hey, we're going to deliver these S-300s to Iran. That's clearly in violation, but the administration says it's not in violation. We're willing to overlook the obvious. China said recently they're going to help Iran build 5 new nuclear plants, similar to the one in Bushehr. I mean, it goes on and on. We're just willing to look the other way because we want to believe in this fantasy. And I'll make just this last point, and I think it's an important one because it's a little bit similar. I don't want to bring up the healthcare, but the healthcare bill, but Obamacare. But you know, when it was a tax, when it was beneficial, and not a tax when it was beneficial in the Supreme Court arguments. Well, for removing sanctions, look at what the administration said, that all of it is nuclear related. Iran's support for terror, oh yeah, its ballistic missile program, sure, its conventional military program, yes, all of this is nuclear related when it's time to lift sanctions. But when it was for the purposes of the nuclear negotiations, they said, no, we don't care about its support for terror. We don't care about any of that. So we've got a double standard, and we've got to be honest about this deal. It's weaker than the UN deal. It's weaker than the president said it was going to be. It's just, the more we know, the more we should get disturbed and anxious and worried.
I probably wouldn't chime in, but since the chair said I'm not her co-chair anymore, I just want to make an observation. Because on the big points here, I think Ileana and I are in agreement in terms of what we expect to see in a deal, and that's what the coming weeks are going to provide the opportunity for us to determine. There are real questions. The fact that Fordo remains open, that Iraq is not completely shut down, those are concerns. The Secretary Moniz has started with explanations of what will be done there. I think a lot more investigation is required on the part of members of Congress to understand exactly what will happen in both of those places, since we didn't think either one was going to remain open. It's now, I think, up to the negotiators to explain why that's a satisfactory result, and that's going to require, I think, some further analysis. On the issues of sanctions relief and the timing of sanctions relief, I absolutely, I couldn't support an agreement that provides immediate relief of sanctions. And I understand that the Ayatollah would prefer an agreement and Rouhani would prefer an agreement in which sanctions are lifted immediately. That's not a deal that will get support on the Hill, and the negotiators have told us that's not going to be in a final deal. Again, this is one where yes, it's absolutely concerning to hear these statements coming out of Iran, but ultimately, I think we're going to judge what winds up in a final deal. And just one last piece of this. One of the piece on the framework that we haven't really discussed is the inspections regime and the ability to fully inspect any site anywhere in the country. And again, the frameworks, there's some question in the framework, just as there's some question in the framework of the military dimensions of the program. But again, in my case, as one member of Congress, but I think there are others who share my view, if the deal as it's ultimately struck doesn't require Iran to fully permit inspections, and I think more importantly, as has been my position from the very beginning, if it doesn't require Iran to come clean on the military dimensions of their program, then there is no way that we could expect that we should take the rest of the deal as a serious one that would prevent their moving forward, not at a time when they ignored all but half of one of the 12 requirements that the questions that the IAEA has posed to them. So these are lots of, I think, very legitimate questions that over the coming weeks we're going to really dig in to see if it's possible to get to a deal that addresses them. I'm not sure that it is, but it might, and that's, I think, an important role that we're going to play as this process moves ahead.
Very good. I want to ask one more question on the Iran front. When we talk about sanctions relief, there's a lot of concern about where Iran will be able to spend those hundreds of millions or billions of dollars. Of course, we're talking about Hezbollah. We're talking about Hamas, the Houthis in Yemen, the various militias that are conquering territory in Iraq. What can Congress do to prevent this if, in fact, Iran gets that sanctions relief? I mean, this has been one of the major criticisms that has come out thus far, apart from the expectation that Iran will quit, or will cheat, rather. The question is, how can we stop this? Do we have ideas in the works?
Well, it's going to be very difficult, and in fact, one of the specific parts about this framework agreement leading up to the final deal, the only part that's very crystal clear and specific is when we're going to release all of this money to Iran. Boy, we're very specific about that. We're a little bit fuzzy on everything else, but we're really specific. This is when you're going to get this much money at this date. And I think lifting the sanctions is going to allow, open up the floodgates, all of this money pouring into Iran. What do you think they're going to be doing? Well, look what they've been doing while we've been negotiating with them. They've been supporting Hezbollah. They've been supporting the Houthis that have now spiraled Yemen out of control. They've been talking to the folks in Gaza and say, take up arms against Israel. While we're negotiating, we're supposed to be negotiating in good faith. All of this has been happening. You know, they blow up a mock aircraft carrier of the U.S. and we just look the other way as if none of that matters. So how can we make sure, how can we track the money to make sure that the billions that we are releasing to Iran will not be used to pursue its nuclear ambitions, will not be used to support its ballistic missile ambitions, to support terror, and just because they're now fighting ISIL, as Prime Minister Netanyahu said, the enemy of my enemy is my enemy. That axiom that we used to say that person would be my friend is no longer true. Because the only reason that ISIL and Iran are in a fight is because who is going to establish the caliphate? Me, no you, me, you. Otherwise, they would be part of that destabilizing and terror network throughout the area. So we should not be fooled. How can we track that money? We're actually freeing up a lot of money that is going to be used against U.S. interests and in support of the terrorist network. And I'm very worried. I'm increasingly worried and increasingly agitated.
So I want to ask one more question before we open it up to the audience, and I'd like, if you will, for both of you to answer. And that is, the theme of today is whether America is an actor or a spectator in the Middle East. It's obviously become increasingly complex. We have, in Syria, you've got Muslim Brotherhood and Al-Qaeda and ISIS groups fighting against Assad and Iran. I had one Middle East observer tell me this is like the movie Alien versus Predator, and you'd just rather sit back, open up a bag of popcorn, and enjoy the show. What is our role right now as the Middle East becomes this complex? Who are our allies? Who should we be siding with? I mean, do we have a guiding principle at this point for the way forward?
Sure. First, let me just make one observation about the money. I think, look, there's somewhere between 100 and 150 billion dollars of Iranian assets that are frozen. You don't need much of that. They don't need much of that to have a very dramatic effect on their efforts to destabilize the region. If you look at what Iran is doing in Yemen, in Iraq, what they do in Lebanon, if you look at the role that they continue to play propping up the Assad regime, it wouldn't require an awful lot of that money to really advance those destabilizing efforts. And part of the things that I think one of the things we need to see before we get to the end of this process is, one, the chairman is right. When does this money made available to them? Now we've been told that there will be no sanctions relief until they comply with their obligations. That's good. The question is, which obligations? What's the timing? And I think Congress needs to see in some detail exactly what they have to do to have access to that, because of the concerns about how that money will be used. One last thing is, don't forget, we've been releasing from the frozen assets $700 million on a regular basis, and I also think it will be helpful for us to know the extent to which we've been able to track that money over the period of time since November of 2013, when the interim deal was announced, to give us some sense of what we should demand in a final deal. I think that's an appropriate role for Congress to play as well. As far as our role in the region, look, what principles do we have? Right? First, we act in what is in our own best interest. That's always the case. And keeping Americans safe is right at the top of that list. And it may have been as a result of the horrific beheadings of U.S. citizens, but ISIS certainly captured America's attention and I think has prompted a greater role for us in the region. So, I mean, U.S. interest is obviously at the top of the list. We have, throughout the region, we have long-standing relationships that matter, starting with the relationship between the United States and Israel. You cannot look at the Middle East and what our role should be without recognizing that there is just one beachhead of true democracy with respect for human rights and women's rights and LGBT equality and all of the things, the freedoms that matter so deeply to us, and that's Israel. That U.S.-Israel relationship has to be paramount and central to how we approach the broader region. That's another one. And I would also just say that sometimes we lose sight of the fact that throughout our history, human rights have always mattered to us. And as the new recipient of the Jeane Kirkpatrick Award, it's an appropriate time to recognize the importance of human rights in this analysis as well. In Syria, the fact that Assad has now slaughtered well over 200,000 of his own citizens should matter to us on its face. That should be offensive enough to us that we step up our role, not in sending U.S. troops to defeat Assad, but in exerting the kind of leadership that we can exert as America's sole superpower, military leadership, strategic planning, economic warfare, economic sanctions, the kind of technological advances that we have that we can take the lead on. All of those matter as we look at the region and pursuing our interests there.
Madam Chairman, briefly.
Well, I sort of agree with Ted, and I sort of don't, because he brings up Syria. I think some of the for a long time in this presidency, I think America has been a bystander. We really haven't asserted our role as a superpower. We're sheepishly accepting that title, but don't want to exert it. And I'm looking at just last week when the president spends an hour with Raul Castro, and yet when Prime Minister Netanyahu comes to Washington, doesn't even give him 1 minute. That tells you a lot about the values, and our allies see that. They take note of that. And I just got back last week from a CODEL with the speaker. We went to Saudi Arabia, we went to Iraq, we went to Jordan, we went to Israel, and some of our allies are questioning where we stand on these important issues, because they see an administration that doesn't quite note the difference between an ally and an adversary, and it doesn't seem like that's America's role in the world. It doesn't seem like that's going to keep us safer. And talk about Syria. The president said this is a red line. If they use chemical weapons, well, it was proven that they used chemical weapons, and then we backed away. And some people will say, well, Congress didn't act, but we need a president who will be there in the ring with us to say, this is why we need to act. And so our allies are taking the fight, as they should, to fight ISIL. But but it's not for the good of the universe. I think that we need to see what our standards are and how these moving parts are impacting us. We thank Saudi Arabia for taking the fight in Yemen, and we thank Jordan for taking the fight against ISIL. So our allies are standing up, but they expressed a sense of wonder about where America stands in this whole area. Are we losing our edge? Are we losing our leadership ability? Yes, we want them all to stand up and fight these bad guys, but we have a role to play there as well. We should not walk away from the world stage, and we should not be willing so readily to make bad deals with all the bad guys in the world.
Okay, I think we actually have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions. I don't know if anybody here is walking around with a microphone, but we can take, there's a gentleman here if you'd like to ask.
I can project. So let's say the president invites you both in and says, I take Congress seriously. Really? What's the one thing I could say or do that would make me more credible in your eyes?
Well, first of all, the fact that he would be coming to us and asking us, that's sort of like fantasy football. I don't see that playing out. The president has had a standoffish relationship at best with Congress. I think he considers us a nuisance rather than a helping partner. And I wish that he would engage with us more actively on domestic and international affairs. Doesn't mean we're gonna always agree, but there should be more of a partnership. I think in terms of the Iranian deal, what I would ask him is, live up to the promises that you made while you were campaigning. Live up to your own words, where you said it's not how many centrifuges Iran is going to keep, but that we will do everything possible to make sure that they will never be nuclear capable. Live up to your own words, and that would make me happy.
Look, I think on Iran, since that's what we're focused on, there are a whole host. I've touched on a number of them here. There are a good number of us in Congress who believe that if it's possible to achieve a good diplomatic deal, that's obviously the preferable approach. The question is there enough in the framework, given some of the questions and some of the comments coming out of Iran, to characterize it as a good deal? The president has said, let's wait until we see what the final deal is to say. I mean, I think that my response to that would be, and in terms of how best to approach these issues, let's not wait. Let's have the opportunity to have a meaningful discussion about the concerns that we have, and those are the discussions that have started to take place this week with Secretary Kerry and Secretary Moniz, but ultimately it's the president that is leading on this, and it's a discussion that ought to take place, I think, directly with him, for him to make the case, not to justify what's in a final deal, but to give us the opportunity to make very clear what we believe ought to be in that final deal.
Well, I've been told that we are unfortunately out of time for this panel. Madam Chairman, Congressman Deutch, I want to thank you very much for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us today. We will continue to look to you for leadership and guidance on the Iran issue. We appreciate the fact that you're able to work together toward the common goal of protecting our country and to preventing Iran from gaining a nuclear weapon. We're proud to give you these awards today. Very aptly, they're going to the right people, and we're very pleased to be able to present it. So everybody, a warm round of applause. Thank you. Cliff, you want to come up?